Right now, the profession is under a tremendous amount of pressure. Everyone has a camera. Everyone is a photographer, so to speak. That's kind of like everyone who can type is an Ernest Hemingway. We know that, or Stephen King. We know that's not plausible. Another thing was Ernest Hemingway a typist? Was Stephen King a typist? We kind of insist on being photographers. Basically, what we should be thinking about is what are we doing with photography? It's part of our problem is we're selling photographs. Photographs in the eyes of the public are a small thing. They're a sheet of paper. They're an image on an iPad, an iPod. Photographs are an image on the screen. They're an image in the magazine. You could buy a magazine for $3.25. If we're going to insist on being photographers and selling photography, we're going to have to compete at that level. But let's think about this a moment. Can photography be used to do something else? Could we utilize photography to produce art? Can we utilize photography to produce portraits? Can we become a journalist? Can we become a documentarian? And think about it in that respect. I don't know. I think we belittle ourselves, and we fall into that syndrome. The camera is the tool. What we do with the camera is what counts. The photographic process itself is simply that. It's the process. Taking photographs, that's easy. You just push a button. But you know what goes into a typewriter comes out of a typewriter. What goes into a camera comes out of a camera. And frankly, on my typewriter or my word processor, there aren't many Ernest Hemingways come out. I don't know about yours. And the point of it is that as a portraitist, though, I like to see a lot of really fine artistic portraits coming out, some lifestyle portraits that have a meaning to people. And basically, I think that's what one of the things we need to think about. You know, everybody buys, purchases, and they love their experiences, what their experiences. You really can't gain respect and desire and purchase anything that you haven't had an experience with. And unfortunately, the public's experiences in photography is at a level that is downgrading it, so to speak. I mean, it's everywhere. Everybody can do it, and some of them are pretty good at it. So if we're going to insist on competing at that level, then we have to face up to that. My premise is that portraits to hang on walls, that the competition is not there. It's got to get a step better. It has to become the Ernest Hemingway of art, or the Stephen King of portraiture. It has to become something a little bit more that has meaning to a family. When they begin to respect it and desire it, they will spring for it. They're constantly buying furniture. They're constantly buying things for their homes. How do you give a portrait meaning? Well, we need to study our perceptiveness. We need to approach it from the standpoint of what is it we're trying to show. If we're just trying to record a person's face or a person's body, I mean, we can point the camera and learn a little bit about lighting, and we can do that. But basically, a portraiture, a good portrait is more than that. I often say that a really, really good portrait is one that a total stranger would stop and look at as they walk by it. Grandmother and relatives definitely want a recording of what the subject looks like. But a total stranger doesn't know that. They don't care anything about that. It's got to be something, some essence to it to cause them to stop. I would say that's a successful portrait. You take a portrait of like some of the things we do of families riding horses or families on the beach, families enjoying themselves walking on hikes up in the ski area. Even if you do a studio portrait, it can have something that shows essence of that person and that family. And I think that's the important thing that we're going to have to approach. There's another trend too, and that is thinking about the old masters' portraits. I mean, we often say, well, we don't like posed portraits and we're going to do everything lifestyle. That's true. I'm a lifestyle portraitist, but I have a great deal of respect for the old masters and the way they posed some of their painted portraits. And you've got a lot of photographers today, top flight portraitists, that are successful at that. The studio portrait may be making a comeback because it is something, the finishing of that studio portrait, the lighting, the background, and so forth, to give it that feeling, you know, of an old master's painting, is something that everybody can't do. The first thing that I think a relatively new photographer entering the portrait industry needs to decide is that, what is it that I want to do? Do I just want to sell photographs of people? That's one thing, that's pictures. There's lots of people out there doing that, and there's more and more. Where there used to be 5 or 6 portrait studios in the phone book, there's now 75 or 80 people advertising portraiture. So if that's what we want to do, that's one thing. My feeling is that we need to kind of think about, what is a portrait to us? What approach it from a standpoint, what is it that we would like to do? Would we like to have portraits that hang on walls? To me, I've been living with it so long and working on it. Believe me, I've been over the road in all these different directions, but to me, a portrait is something that needs to hang on the wall. That's just what it is. A little picture sitting on a desk to me is not a portrait. It's a picture. Now, yes, you could say, well, that's a miniature portrait. Okay, I'll go along with that. You know, it's a portrait of a person. If it has great essence, it's fine. But portraits to really look good on the wall have to be of a size that from the chosen viewing distance, you can identify what's happening or what the people are. If I have to walk up and lean over a Davenport and get my eyes close to the wall to see what's in a small 8 by 10 or 11 by 14 portrait, that's an insult. I mean, that's ridiculous. Why do I want to do that? I mean, if it's worth hanging on the wall, it's worth understanding what it is from a little distance. Therefore, that means a little bit of size. And instituting some space and some positioning and some line and some tone control is of utmost importance. And I sometimes feel that photographers who basically use a camera to take pictures don't think about that. And that is very, very important, because that's what we're going to see. The client will never see the camera that we took it on, or they aren't likely to. It doesn't matter to them, really. What they're interested in is, what are they seeing on the wall? What are we presenting? I see so many portraits being delivered that are straight prints from the lab, or straight prints from the camera, so to speak. And you look at them and say, my gosh, the tone control is lacking. The positioning could be so much better. The space is not utilized adequately. So I think that everyone should study that. Now, as far as tips for the new photographers, if it's photography you want to tip on, or creating portraits, that's one thing. If it's trying to be a success selling them to the public, that's another. I mean, making this into a profession where you can make a living at it is a different animal altogether, and it's not an easy thing to do. So you have to start thinking about, how do I build value into this? How do I build something into this image that people will be willing to pay money to hang on their wall? And we cover that extensively at the Wall Portrait Conference. We spend 6 days touching on this and working on this. You know what? When people ask me, what do you specialize in? You know, I mean, I know that they're thinking, do I specialize in families or weddings or high school seniors or pets or so forth, whatever. I had to stop and think, well, I specialize in creating images to hang on walls that people can see and enjoy. Maybe it satisfies my ego, but I'm also providing a service, I think, to the public. And pet photography is an absolute ideal area of portraits for walls. Basically, high school senior portraiture is an excellent area for wall portraiture. In fact, I think that if we were doing more wall portraits on it, we wouldn't be losing the business like we have been recently. Every wedding should have at least one wall portrait. I have sold 3 and 4 wall portraits on some weddings. I've had brides come back 5 and 6 years later and say, you know that wall portrait that you talked us into buying when we were picking up our album? That means more to us now than the album means, because it's on the wall where we can see it. We walk by it almost every day. The album is off the coffee table now. It's up on the shelf. I seldom get it out and look at it. But that wall portrait is always there for me to see. I think that landscape photography offers a great area for images to hang on wall in an adequate size. I recently joined a gallery over at Ocean Shores where there's 26 artists and there's 3 or 4 photographers. And one of our photographers just sold a 30 by 40 canvas wrap image of an undersea scene. I think that they have to be of things that are appropriate. In Washington State, we have such beautiful scenery, and I realize we're talking to people from many states, and every state has things that will make great pictorials. If I was in the heart of Kansas, where you had broad expanses of wheat fields, I would have images of every type of strand of wheat. You know, images of large strands of wheat, little groups of wheat in vases, large expansive fields of wheat, horizontals of wheat. You know, it would be great. Well, you know, one of my heroes was Ray Atkinson, way back 65 years ago, 50 years ago. Ray was an Oregon landscape photographer, pictorialist, and Bob and Ira Spring in Washington State. And I've always done lots of those. I have lots of them I found. Just today, we delivered a wall hanging that was basically a landscape. It had a Western theme to it, some cowboys over a campfire, and $1,250 sale. And this couple is building a new home up in Cle Elum, and they have one room that has a Western theme. And they saw this image on one of our exhibits, and they said, we've got to have that image to hang in our living room. So we need to do things that will be appropriate for people to feel as a work of art. You know, people hang prints, collector's prints they sometimes call them, made by artists 200 years ago or 100 years ago. Some artist, maybe a painting of a boat going down a canal in Venice, in Italy, or some place that we've never been or may never be. Why in the world aren't we putting art on our walls of areas that we do love and that we are at? Maybe it's because we haven't seen it yet. And we don't want to fall into that syndrome of, well, these little pictures, you know, we make these little pictures and we look at them, they don't have much value. Let's think in terms of expanding those into wall art to hang on walls. Now this means, of course, that we've got to get adequate quality and resolution in the beginning in order to do that, but that's available to us today. The equipment is available to do that. And this is an area, if a person has an interest in landscape photography, I definitely would give it a try. There's a danger there. Everybody's doing this, and unfortunately they don't always make their presentations so that appetizing. I mean, they'll just make a straight photographic print and frame it and expect somebody to look at it as a piece of art. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't always give the depth that we need. We may have to do some surface work, or we may have to do some enhancement to change the contrast levels sometimes of the background. We have the ability to do that so that the subject matter stands out, so that when you look at, so that something attracts the eye and impresses the mind. And I think the landscape artists have a great future, actually. Parachute story. Oh, you're kidding me.
No, it's parachute story.
Mine?
Yeah,
Oh, come on. Well, you know.
Tom, where were you? This will give a little background on you. What were you doing? Tell us what happened.
Well, I attended the Navy School of Photography, and back in 1949, and the last, actually, the School of Aerial Photography was combined with the regular photography school for 26 weeks, which was many months, and right at the end, the last 3 or 4 weeks of our photography classes, the Airedales, or the ones who were in the aviation division, we split off and we started flying and doing aerial photographs. Well, we were flying propeller planes in those days, but they were big fighter type planes. One of them, the SNJ Texan, and that we used for our reconnaissance photography. It was where you got into the plane and behind the pilot, and you turned around backwards. This would enable you to be in a gunner's position in case you were in combat. Also, it enabled you to swing the big heavy camera around into the wind so you could get it over the side. Now, we opened the canopy in the back so that we'd be right in the open. And we used to, we used to go out and take photographs of ourselves on these planes. You know, we'd check out parachutes and take our cameras out, and we'd climb up on the side of the plane and do portraits of each other to take back into school to turn in for part of our work. One day I checked out a parachute, and I went out to the went out on the tarmac, and somehow I accidentally tripped the ripcord, and that parachute silk just spread all over the tarmac. Well, we had a rule around there that you had to be really, really careful with those parachutes, and it took a long time to pack. I knew I was in trouble, but I grabbed this parachute up, and I went back into the parachute loft. I mean, I grabbed it, I had my arms full of silk. I ran back into the parachute loft, tossed it on the counter where the ensign on the other side was checking things in and out. I said, some idiot out there dumped this silk all over the tarmac. I just brought it in for you. I turned around and walked out the door. But there was another one better than that. We had a young Texas photographer in our group. We called him, he was short, he was really, really small. And he wasn't quite as big as the cameras he had to work with. But in these fighter planes, when the photographer turned around backwards and he was getting ready to take his photographs, you didn't sit in your seat. You took off your seat belt, but you had a gunner's belt around you, and you hooked the gunner's belt into eyelets on the floor. This is so that the pilot had to maneuver, you wouldn't get dumped out of the aircraft. So at any rate, this young man had gotten himself into his position, had his gunner's belt on, and was ready to raise his camera up and go out over the side, and he accidentally tripped his parachute ring inside the rear cockpit of this SNJ airplane. There was silk flapping everywhere. I mean, the wind was blowing, the canopy, he couldn't get to the canopy. He was holding the silk down, the weight of the camera and himself as best he could, and there's nothing he could do. But he could talk on his mic. He got the pilot's attention, and the pilot said, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. He said, don't move it, don't move anything. He said, you can't get to your canopy. The photographer said, no way, the silk will go. The pilot said, don't move a muscle, hang on to that silk. If that gets outside the aircraft any further, it'll rip you in two, because he was still tied in the plane with his gunner's belt. He couldn't even get to the gunner's belt to take it loose. I mean, if it would have pulled him out of the plane, he might have landed safely out there somewhere in the sea somewhere. They could have got him. But the pilot throttled down to almost a stall speed of about 80, 90 miles an hour, and this big aircraft was slow, I'm telling you. And he crippled himself back into the airport and got down, so we saved Shorty. Once we got Shorty back safe, then boy, it was a big joke. We laughed like everything.